Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the program this evening, Through My Eyes with Professor Bolaji Akinyemi. Prof, you're welcome to the program again this evening.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you for being here again with us, Prof. We appreciate, and to our viewers, thank you for joining us on the program this evening. We've got loads and loads to talk about. But, Prof, before we go into our full discussion for today, Uh, COVID seems to be an important point that just keeps evolving and evolving. And there's been some interesting news that's come out this week talking about some new developments regarding COVID, the possibility of needing additional jabs. What are your views on that, Prof?
Well, I'm not surprised that COVID will continue to evolve. It is evolving, so I'm not surprised that the issue of the vaccine will continue to metamorphose itself because presumably those scientists working behind the scene need to keep up with development or the mutation of the vaccine itself. Um, we are all still at the experimental stage, and presumably we shouldn't then blame governments or scientists who themselves will have to continue to experiment with how to cope with the vaccine. So if they now say that there is a need for a third jab, well, who are we to argue with that? I have sought to keep out of uh, discussions about this vaccine business to allow science to lead us. Um, but when they now say there's need for, or there may be a need for a third jab, and then they decide that it is those of us who are over 60 uh, who will be experimented upon for the third jab. If they know what some of us went through to present ourselves for the second jab, they wouldn't ask us to march forward for a third jab. Uh, but now they are saying is, we old people who should step forward and present ourselves for the third jab. Well, as I said, but let government explain to people, or let the scientists step forward and explain why there is a need for the third jab. Because you see, this may play into the hands of those who have said, "We told you so. Don't trust these jabs. They passed on the first one onto you, then they passed on the second one. Now they are talking about the third jab. But um, the flu jab is an annual thing. And so there is really nothing unique about having a third jab or a fourth jab, or as it may turn out, an annual jab. Nothing to pick a quarrel about. My quarrel now is with what I had always suspected one somewhere along the line is going to come up. And that is not two things. The first is the huge profit that Pfizer and now Moderna today have announced their profit sheet, their balance sheet. They've made enormous profit. Fine, that's in the past. What then is the justification for raising the prices of the vaccine? You made profit last year at the old rate. Why do you want to now have a killing price by increasing your prices this year? There's something that does not smack of equity in that. Number two, don't forget, I'm sure that these corporations, businessmen will not like the world to remember that it's the taxpayers' money that was used to develop these vaccines. Most of the governments were panicked, were frightened into making what one will call initial, not only just deposits, initial outlay to cover the full cost of development of this vaccine. And they took a risk with the taxpayers' money, because if it didn't work, if they couldn't develop the vaccine, you lost that money. Fortunately, in some of the cases, it worked. Vaccines were developed. Then what is the equitable justification for you now increasing the prices of the vaccine? It is simply not fair. This is again part of what people have been complaining about in the past 6 months. Rich corporations, rich men, they don't pay taxes, they rip off people, they rip off their countries, they rip off their governments. And this is again ripping off syndrome by saying you're going to increase the prices of the vaccine. I suspect that the low income and medium income countries are going to have these new prices passed on to them. We are complaining that we cannot pay the price, the old prices. Now you will be passing on the new ones to us. How are we then supposed to again take care? And already we are being buffeted by the third wave of this pandemic.
Prof, there's a point here that I want to pull out from in line with what you're talking about here. And this is France, Israel, Germany, who are now saying we are ignoring what the WHO is saying, and we are going ahead with this third jab. But for the people who fall in that category, they would be happy at such a thing to say at least we're going to be protected. However, whose position is that there are other countries who haven't even had the second jab, and you are already giving the third jab? When we start to talk about national interest, wouldn't people see that as in the interest of their nation?
We've been playing with, or we've been confronted with what we have called vaccine nationalism from the very beginning. And I don't blame countries. Basically, we human beings are selfish. We're a selfish lot. Actually, I think at times animals behave better than we human beings. We have this streak of selfishness in us. Take care of your own first. And then whatever is left, yes, you can then play missionary role with distribution. WHO has said what it is expected to say, but I'm afraid, that's not going to carry water. Very few people will listen to it because we know from the beginning. I mean, people kept saying it. Those who are in the know, that even in the warehouses of most countries, you have vaccine that can vaccinate their people 3 times over, while in low income or medium income countries, they have not even finished the first vaccination wave for their own people. But I expect that. What we should, because see, I hate playing victim. I hate low income or medium income countries play victim. I've said it on this program before. There are at least 4 or 5 African countries that I know of that have the capability and the financial wherewithal to make vaccines. But because of bad governance, they haven't done so. They've allowed their laboratories to be run down. South Africa, Egypt, Nigeria, probably Morocco, probably Kenya, to give you the 5, have the money, the scientific know-how to make vaccines. Why have they allowed there? And yet, these are also the same countries where the members of their governing elite have monies in the bank accounts abroad. And we're talking about humongous amounts and not just peanuts. And then we now start to pay victim. Why won't they share the vaccine with us? Who told you not to make your own vaccine? Who told you to allow your laboratories to run down? Your scientists are there. At least in 1 or 2 countries, I know some of their scientists who are there. But the administrators in government who make financial allocation, who decide on priorities, simply look down on these scientists. They don't make allocation to them. And then when disaster comes, when tragedy comes, we expect to be bailed out, and we now start going cap in hand. I don't like buying into this victim syndrome for some of our countries. So I don't blame any country that wants to take care of its own people first. The only thing is, this is a peculiar pandemic. It's either we all play safe or nobody's going to be safe because of the way not only the mutation takes place, but the way in which it infects. Even people, obviously now people who have even been vaccinated are still not completely safe unless you are going to ground all travel, ground all flights. Then you can take care of your own and know that you are safe. But given the way it is, it's either we are all safe or nobody is safe.
Thank you for that, Prof. Let's move to Cuba. Um, Recently, we had President Biden in a meeting, a conference with the German Chancellor, called Cuba a failed state. What do you call Cuba, Prof? I know we've talked about uh, uh, um, the Castros, and you've shared your views about the Castros, but would you also regard Cuba as a failed state?
Um, I think you are asking me the wrong question in the sense that I wouldn't want to be quoted out of context. And you know me, I don't like starting stories in the middle. So please let us step back a few or more than a few steps, and then later I will answer your question. You know, I never thought I will, on this program or on any program, agree with uh, Trump as regards the what did he used to call it? I think he used to call it, is it the hidden state? Um, or he used to, anyway, he made reference to agencies of government that government does not control, but that in fact they control government. You see, the problem of Cuba, just like Haiti, went back all the way back to probably about half a century ago. And America was behind the problem of Cuba and the problem of Haiti, in the sense that as of the time that the Castro Revolution took place, Cuba was under the control of the mafia, sugar barons, who controlled the government and ran the country. And when the revolution took place, two brothers actually were in charge of American policy towards Cuba. They were the Dulles brothers. One was the Secretary of State, the other was the director of the CIA. They were brothers. You didn't get any more right wing than those two. And they saw their job as protecting American business interests at home and abroad. And so they were determined to make sure that the Castro Revolution failed. And they were the ones who sold the Bay of Pigs invasion, not only to President Eisenhower, who, good old general, good old soldier that he was, he had his suspicion about that whole program of getting Cuban exiles to invade Cuba and overthrow the Castro brothers. But he was already on his way out as president. And Kennedy was coming in. And they sold that program to Kennedy. He didn't pay too much attention when he gave his approval, and it failed. But the deep state in the United States. I think that's what Trump called them, that deep state in the United States till today is still determined that no, new Cuba will not succeed, just as Haiti will not succeed. And so when Biden calls Cuba a failed state, the question I will ask is, who made it a failed state? It's not the Castro brothers. If anything, the Castro revolution turned Cuba from a playground of the mafia and of American playboys into a respectable nation. A nation that, it's the only medium income or even low income countries that has come up with a vaccine. That's number one. A COVID-19 vaccine. It has come up with a malaria vaccine, and I understand that it is already on the second stage of a cancer vaccine. That is in spite of all the sanctions that America has imposed on it. Now, I ask President Biden, are you telling us you disagreed with your boss, President Obama, who introduced new relationship with Cuba, and if you went to visit them, removed some of the sanctions that were there? Are you saying President Obama was wrong? Are you saying you disagreed with him? During the campaign, Biden, the candidate, said he was going to remove the sanctions that Trump had reimposed and strengthened against Cuba. Now, Biden, the president, has refused to do that. Is this the deep state at work? That whatever Biden wants to do, they are not going to permit. And the wisdom on the street is that Biden is doing this because of the votes in Florida. Well, just like Biden expected the Republicans in the Senate to cooperate with him, he is going to fail in thinking that the Florida Republicans, who are mostly Cuban exilees, will vote for him in the next presidential elections. It's wishful thinking. So I'm very surprised. So all I can say is, I don't know, if Cuba is a failed state, it is thanks to the United States.
Prof, thank you for the history there. But I have a question for you. We saw the Cubans first time in almost 6 decades come out and protest. If you were a Cuban, what would you be advising that one, your government do? And as a Cuban citizen, not in government, what can you do?
Well, I won't say I am wise enough. No, I won't lay that claim. But let me say I am experienced in this business enough to suspect that deep state in the United States is behind the demonstrations on the streets of Cuba. They will not be doing their job if the CIA does not have agents in Cuba. They will not be doing their job if resources are not available to, sponsor Cubans. And things are hard in Cuba. I admit that. But I am saying that this is due to the sanctions the Americans imposed. The Americans imposed on Cuba. One of the cries of the Cuban demonstrators was, you built hotels for tourists and you say you don't have any money to build those houses. But those hotels were built by the Cuban government because Obama had lifted the sanctions preventing American tourists from coming to visit Cuba. So those hotels were where those tourists were going to stay and pay. So, and pay in dollars, in foreign exchange, so that money will be available. Money will be going into the budget of the Cuban government. But when Trump reimposed the ban against these tourists, of course, nobody to occupy the hotels. And when Biden came in, instead of removing the ban on tourists coming in, he kept the Trump bans. This is one of the Trump policies that Biden has kept. And I find it intolerable. I cannot explain it except, as I said, the deep state is at work.
Let's move on to this point again about the United States. And this is the proposed shift in terms of their policy on export of arms. It appears that President Biden is shifting slightly towards exporting arms to countries that have good human rights records, as opposed to what some have said President Trump did, where he favored more the defense contractors and the economic side of things. What do you have to say about this shift? Given only last week we were talking about the hold that had been put on export of arms to Nigeria. What do you feel about this shift in policy, Prof?
Um, you see, making human rights a factor of your foreign policy, as I said last week, is always problematic. First of all, your hands are not clean. You have human rights problems yourself in your own country. That's number one. Number two, you need relationships in dealing with some of the problems that the world faces. Um, Climate problems, you know, there, there, there are two or three global problems that you need global cooperation. But if you are going to make enemies of Russia, of China, two major countries, global countries that you need on the basis of human rights, you are not going to get them to change their human rights policy, number one, and then you are going to jeopardize all these other global programs which you need their cooperation. Number three, if you now decide you are not going to sell weapons which people have paid for, You won't sell the weapons to them. You ignore the fact that Russia and China are major arms producing countries now. And so long, I mean, we are past the age when maybe the United States was the only arms manufacturer. And if she said no, then it was no. So, I mean, countries then, remember during our civil war, we had that problem when Western countries refused to sell weapons to the Nigerian government, and they then turned to the Soviet Union that then sold weapons. And really, it took a balancing act for Gawan not to then shift the Nigerian foreign policy towards Russia as a result of, again, the arms embargo that we faced. So the United States may then end up in a way pushing countries into the arms of its competitors globally. I don't want to be misunderstood. I have no truck at all with dictators that are guilty of humongous human rights, violations, ones that involve, killing their own citizens, violating the rights of their own citizens. But you've got to, if you are going to go down that route, maybe don't make it a blanket judgment. Weigh each country on the basis of your own judgment. What tends to happen? What tends to happen is this. Countries, especially Western countries, make judgments based on pressure from their NGOs and their human rights activists who, as I keep saying in this program, jump into an issue in the middle. Jump into an issue in the middle. They never go to the beginning. Take the Tigray situation in Ethiopia. Tigray formed the government of Ethiopia for almost over 20 years, and they didn't complain. It's when this new government came in and the Tigray political elite lost their power in Addis Ababa that they then started talking about marginalization, and they then resorted to arms to now start blaming the present government of Ethiopia for what is going on. Ignore the fact that for 20 years, the Tigray political elite formed the government in central Ethiopia. So the people who the governments of the governments of middle income countries who are often at the receiving end of these accusations have not learned their lesson of actually employing public relations firms to argue their cases in Washington or in London or in Paris. They depend upon their embassies who have not sufficient access to the top rank echelon of the governments where they are located. So really, decisions then get made based on incorrect or insufficient assessment of the reality of the ground. So the United States may be boxing itself into a corner uh, on this issue and on the general issue of making human rights a determining factor of the foreign policy.
One other thing that we've seen from the Senate Foreign Relations Committee in the last week is this issue of taking away power from the White House to declare war. And I think it raises a big question, not just for the United States, but for all countries, all governments. To what extent do we allow the executive arm of government to commit a nation to war without having to go through any sort of authorization, whether it's from Congress or Parliament or wherever? Um, what is your view on that, sir?
In most countries, definitely in the United States, the power to declare war is clear, lies with the Senate. Or where there is no upper chamber, then it lies with Parliament. That is clear. The what the problem created in the United States was during the Vietnam War. Um, Again, quote unquote, that deep state, with the knowledge of President Lyndon Johnson, lied to Congress that the American naval ship was attacked by North Korea. I mean, North Vietnam. We now know that that wasn't true, that there was no such attack. And the Senate and Congress were so incensed at the audacity of North Vietnam attacking an American naval ship that it gave on what's been called the Tonkin War Resolution. It gave authorization to Lyndon Johnson as the President of the United States to declare war, launch massive attack on North Vietnam, which was what Lyndon Johnson did. And since then, almost every American president had actually gone to war, whether in Afghanistan or Iraq or Syria, without the authorization of the Senate. It has used that, Tonkin War Declaration that empowered the American president to go to war on his own judgment. They have used it. And as it has become clear, America has paid very dearly resources, lives, and what have you. Take Afghanistan. 20 years the United States has spent there. Now, some people are now saying, yes, it is true that Osama bin Laden was hiding in those caves there. Could you not have sent waves and waves of American airplanes to bomb those caves into oblivion, even if it's going to take 6 months of daily bombing. America had the planes, they had the ammunition. Did you have to put troops on the ground? Troops that then got sucked in, and after 20 years, you are now leaving. So there is no doubt that the provision that war can only be declared with the authorization of the Senate or Parliament, or what have you, is a well thought out provision. However, it is not a panacea for this problem we are talking about, because nothing prevents the CIA, the FBI, deep state from coming to lie to the president, who then takes that lie to Congress. And on the basis of that lie, because the Senate itself does not have the capacity of the CIA or the FBI or, or the National Security Council, that the president has at his disposal. In England, Tony Blair went with Bush, the son, into Iraq, and later on, because they said, because intelligence community said that Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction, only for them to find out that he didn't have weapons of mass destruction. And both Bush and Blair knew that the intelligence community were lying to them, because there were elements within those intelligence community who said, this is not right. We need more time to actually dig into this. But they've decided that they wanted to go anyway. And so Blair lied to Parliament, Bush lied to Congress. And so nothing prevents that from happening. It will continue to happen.
Sir, I want to ask a question in line with what you've just said in terms of the intelligence community. Because we had President Biden say to this intelligence community, and I'll quote what he said here. He said, "We are getting back to the basics." He said, "I'll never politicize the work you do. You have my word on that. It's too important for our country." How easy is it for a president or a prime minister to politicize the intelligence community? Surely there will be checks and balances that mean that they cannot just get away with it.
I don't really know. I don't really know what President Biden meant by what he said, because priority of policy is determined by the president. If the president says China is an enemy or an antagonist of the United States, very rarely will you now get the CIA or the intelligence community coming back to say, we don't find any evidence that China is an antagonist. Because just as America will be protecting its national interest, so China will be protecting its own national interest. China will not be a lapdog of the United States. And it's not often that those interests will be in sync. Not necessarily. China will want to be probably the most powerful country in the world, just as United States will want to be the most powerful country in the world. There and then, you're going to get differences. So any policies that either side will be pursuing, whether in space or in the manufacture of Air Force planes, or in the manufacture of naval ships, will be regarded as targeting drive of the other side to be the most important country in the world. And to that extent, will be an antagonist. Usually, intelligence community allows the executive, the president, or the prime minister to decide the political objectives, and it then prepares the wherewithal that will allow the president to successfully carry out those policies. But it's not for the intelligence community to come back and say, well, we don't think that you should encourage China or Russia to catch up with the United States or that kind of thing. In a way, I think what he meant to say, which was not said elegantly, is don't come and lie to me to please me. Tell me the truth, but I will make the policy. But you come and tell me the truth about the reality on the ground. If we can use as an illustration something we've already said earlier on, don't come to me and say Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction because I've made up my mind to attack Iraq anyway. So don't come and, you come and tell me we can't find the weapons, and let me now decide whether I will still go in or not. So that's really what it basically is. Don't come and lie to me. But not you to decide what the policy will be for me.
Let's move the conversation slightly towards the Middle East and look at the approach the US took when they left Afghanistan to say, hey, we're leaving. Now we're seeing the Taliban start to gain ground and to take some provincial capitals in Afghanistan. And the US, to your point, sir, the US has now been sending jets in to bomb some of these stations, which maybe they should have done before, as you have said. But, Prof, the situation seems to be degenerating significantly. What is your view on Afghanistan and the developments that we're seeing?
You know, about 30 years ago, or maybe 25 years ago, I read a dispatch by an American journalist, or it could have been a British journalist, I'm not sure, but it's one of them. He had gone into Afghanistan after the Russians had left. And he wrote this report. I've never forgotten it. He went into the rural side, he went into a village and met an old man, one of these grisly old men who has seen everything that is possible to see in the world. And he met the man in the village, and the man was teaching his grandchildren how to shoot with real guns and everything. And he said to the old man, "What's going on here? Why you? The war is over. The Russians have left. Why are you teaching this your grandchildren how to fight?" Oh, the old man said, "You don't understand. You see, every superpower in the world, for some reason or the other, had always come to Afghanistan. Alexander the Great, he said, the graves of his troops are over there. The Russians had come, the graves are over there. He said, you know what? There will always be some stupid superpower that will come in thinking it can capture Afghanistan. So we never stop fighting in Afghanistan, and we will never stop fighting in Afghanistan. Now the Americans came. Now the Americans are leaving. And I saw a picture last week of a Taliban representative with the Chinese president. I said, uh-oh, is that the next foolish superpower that's going to go into Afghanistan and, gets his nose bloodied? So I'm not surprised at what the Taliban is doing. The Taliban feels it won the war against the Americans. It feels that the Americans didn't defeat them. And so if it feels it won the war against the Americans, what then is the objective of the Taliban but to establish an Islamic state in Afghanistan under Taliban control? That is what is happening. It is expected. It is predictable. And you've been asking me questions about Afghanistan probably 2 or 3 sessions. And I keep telling you that they will get to Kabul. And all these people, look at what has just happened. They blew up the house of the defense secretary, the minister of defense of Afghanistan in Kabul. Taliban is telling you that they are not only going to cause trouble in the provinces, they have the capability to start causing the trouble in Kabul, in the capital. So next month, you are going to ask me questions about Afghanistan again, and I will give you the same answer.
Sir, a spokesperson for the Russian Foreign Ministry was quoted as saying that this Taliban offensive is going to run out of steam. They don't have the capital to push through their agenda. They don't have the support to push through their agenda. Surely Russia must have some information that we don't have access to.
Well, let us take that on board. But I know that Pakistan and China want. Pakistan has always been playing games with the Taliban because they also have Taliban in Pakistan. And so, as long as the Americans were in Afghanistan, the Pakistan deep state was supporting the Taliban in Afghanistan. But now that the Taliban looks like it is going to win, it's not going to pose a problem for Pakistan vis-a-vis the Taliban in Pakistan itself. For the Chinese, they've already come to the conclusion that the central government in Kabul is not going to last. And knowing the kind of games that nations play, I will not be surprised if China, in order to curry favor with the Taliban, is not going to be supplying weapons secretly to the Taliban in Afghanistan. So I suspect that the Russian chap may just be being optimistic.
All right. Just before we close this evening, let's talk about the Tokyo Olympics and what we can learn from the Olympics. So many things have happened from many athletes that have had accidents and have been able to get up and continue, to those who have had the false starts. Prof, what are some of the learning points you have from the Tokyo Olympics?
Uh, we, we have only 1 more minute probably to go for
We'll
me
give
to
you the
cover
time,
the
Prof.
takeaways.
We'll
All
give you the
right.
time. We'll
The,
give you the time.
the,
Continue,
take,
sir.
the, take, the takeaways from the Tokyo Olympic Games. First of all, I am so happy it took place. Victory for the human spirit. Victory for uh, um, victory for the determination that no matter how we no matter the um, whatever it is that we need, whatever it is we need to do when confronted with problems, human beings can overcome those problems. I am happy the game still took place. It's not the games that we were used to, in the sense that we didn't have the public coming in. But then this is not our life. This hasn't been our regular life for the past 1.5 years or so. So that's the first takeaway. When confronted with problems, the human race can overcome. Number two, it has been the phenomenal at times which those who had won, even those who didn't win, their best times. We've had Olympic records, we've had world records, this and that, and what have you. Number three, this issue of athletes becoming refugees had come back again. But I want people to know that this is not new to the Olympics. During the Cold War times, athletes were always defecting. Their trainers, their coaches were always defecting. There will even have been more, if not that there are some countries, I won't mention names of those countries, who put in place measures in terms of detaining the families of athletes to ensure that they come back. But now we've been confronted now by athletes becoming refugees. And as I say, I raise this so that our viewers, our listeners will know it is not something that is new. So we will have another Olympics. It will come. I don't know what shape it will be. It will be confronted with problems, but we will always overcome. And let us praise the human spirit, for that. This particular Olympic is what confronted us with this question of the mental problems that athletes had to combat. Again, before, we really didn't know that it was this, this destructive. We didn't know, but now we know. So next Olympics or any other games, when an athlete says, sorry, I gotta go, I can't take part, it will not surprise us. All in all, I give this Olympic Games, 85%.
Prof, I was going to say maybe there will be an Olympic Games for the elderly, and maybe you would represent us there.
After the third jab, Abi.
On that note, Prof, would you take a third jab?
Oh, you know me. I'm always very cooperative. If you say march forward, I will march forward.
You
Yeah,
march forward.
I
Thank you
will
so
march
much.
forward.
Thank you so much, sir. And
Yeah,
thank you
well,
to our viewers for being there this evening. We'll be back again same time next week. Thank you for joining us, Prof. Thank you for being there again this evening. See you next week.
thank you. Thank you.